The Arizona desert stretched out wide, painted in shades of red and gold under the morning sun. The canyons stood tall like guardians of the land, and the wind whispered across the dry earth. Daniel, a young man in his late 20s, was hiking alone, following a narrow path that led toward the San Pedro River. He loved the quiet of nature, the way the world seemed to slow down out here. Life in the city always felt noisy, but here only the sound of his boots on gravel and the songs of birds filled the air. Daniel carried a small backpack, a bottle of water, and his camera. Hiking was more than exercise for him. It was a way to clear his thoughts. He had recently left his job at an office where every day felt the same. Coming here was his way of starting fresh, away from endless meetings and traffic jams. As he walked, he admired the cottonwood trees lining the river, their green leaves standing out against the dry desert ground. The river looked calm from a distance, but he knew that after heavy rain in the mountains, the water could turn wild without warning. It was then, above the sound of the river, that he heard something unusual. At first it was faint, like the cry of a bird, but as he stopped and listened carefully, he realized it was a human voice, sharp, urgent, and full of fear. Daniel's heart tightened. He dropped his backpack and rushed toward the sound, his boots crunching over rocks and sand. As he reached the riverbank, the scene froze in his eyes. A young woman was caught in the rushing current. Her arms flailed as the water pulled her downstream, her dark hair whipping across her face. She cried out again, but the river roared louder, threatening to swallow her whole. Daniel didn't have time to think. His body moved faster than his mind. Without hesitation, he threw off his jacket, took a deep breath, and plunged into the icy water. The current struck him hard, shoving against his chest and trying to drag him away. The cold shocked him, stealing his breath for a moment, but he pushed forward, using every ounce of strength to fight the pull. His eyes stayed locked on the woman, who struggled to keep her head above the surface. He swam with strong strokes, his arms slicing through the water, his muscles burning as the current tried to push him back. "Hold on," Daniel shouted, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. Her eyes met his for a brief second, filled with both hope and fear. She reached out weakly, but the river twisted her body, pulling her further away. With a final push, Daniel lunged forward and grabbed her wrist. For a terrifying second, he thought the current would rip them apart, but he held on tightly. "I've got you," he shouted again, this time with more force. The woman clung to his arm with desperate strength, her nails digging into his skin. She coughed and sputtered, gasping for air as the river spun them in circles. Daniel knew they couldn't fight the current directly. Instead, he angled his body sideways, letting the water carry them closer to the shore while he guided their movements. Every stroke was a battle, every breath a victory. The river didn't want to let go, but Daniel refused to surrender. Slowly, painfully, he dragged them closer to the bank, his muscles screaming in exhaustion. At last, his feet brushed against rocks near the shallow edge. Summoning all his remaining strength, he pulled the woman with him, stumbling forward until they both collapsed onto the sandy riverbank. For a few moments, they simply lay there, breathing hard, the sound of rushing water fading into the background. Daniel's chest heaved as he looked at the sky, thankful to feel solid ground beneath him again. Beside him, the young woman coughed, water spilling from her lips as she tried to catch her breath. Her eyes opened slowly and she turned to look at him. She was striking, with sharp cheekbones and deep brown eyes that held both strength and vulnerability. Her long hair clung to her face and shoulders, dripping wet. Yet there was a quiet dignity in the way she carried herself, even in this moment of weakness. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice hoarse but steady. She gripped his hand as if afraid he might vanish if she let go. "Thank you." Daniel gave her a small smile, still catching his breath. "I'm just glad I was here at the right time," he said softly. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head slowly, though her body trembled from the cold and shock. "No, just shaken." She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again as if remembering something important. "My name is Ayoka." "Daniel," he replied. Their eyes met again, and though they were strangers, there was already a strange connection between them, born not from words but from the river, from survival, from that desperate moment when one life was in the hands of another. Daniel helped Ayoka sit up, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders to keep her warm. She accepted it with quiet gratitude. Around them, the desert seemed unusually still, as if even nature was watching in silence. The sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow on the river that had nearly claimed her life. "How did you fall in?" Daniel asked gently. He didn't want to press, but his curiosity was strong. "I was gathering herbs near the water," she explained, her voice still unsteady. "The ground gave way and I slipped. The river was stronger than I expected." Her gaze dropped and she seemed ashamed, though Daniel quickly shook his head. "It wasn't your fault," he said firmly. "Rivers like this are dangerous, especially after rain." Ayoka studied him for a long moment as if weighing his words. There was something different in her expression now, something beyond gratitude. She squeezed his hand again and whispered in Apache before repeating in English, "You pulled me back from death. That means something, more than you may know." Daniel didn't understand what she meant, but before he could ask, distant voices called out from the trees beyond the riverbank. Figures emerged, moving quickly toward them. They were members of Ayoka's community, their faces full of alarm until they saw her sitting safely beside Daniel. Relief washed over them and they hurried forward, some speaking in Apache, others in English. "Ayoka!" one of the older women cried, kneeling beside her and touching her face with trembling hands. "We feared the river had taken you." She looked at Daniel with wide eyes. "You saved her?" Daniel nodded modestly. "I just happened to be here." But his words didn't lessen their reaction. The men and women who gathered around looked at him not just with gratitude but with something deeper, something almost solemn. One of the elders, tall and dignified, stepped forward. His hair was streaked with gray, and his presence carried quiet authority. This was Chief Nantan, though Daniel did not yet know his name. The elder studied him carefully, then glanced at Ayoka, who still held Daniel's hand. "You pulled her from the river?" the chief asked in a steady voice. "Yes," Daniel replied simply. The elder nodded once, his expression unreadable. Then in a tone that carried both respect and certainty, he said, "Then you have done more than save her life. You have bound yourself to her by our most sacred law." Daniel blinked, startled. He opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out. Around him, the people murmured softly, their faces filled with awe. He looked at Ayoka, confused, but she only lowered her eyes, as if she already knew this moment would come. Daniel had entered the river thinking only of saving a life. But as he sat there surrounded by people who saw his actions through the lens of ancient tradition, he began to realize his life had just changed in a way he could not yet understand. The riverbank was crowded with voices, the Apache villagers surrounding Ayoka and Daniel as the last light of the sun faded into the horizon. The elder who had spoken, Chief Nantan, stood tall at the center of the group. His words carried weight, and everyone listened when he declared the sacred law. Daniel sat on the ground, still damp from the river, unsure if he had understood correctly. He had only wanted to help, but now he felt the eyes of an entire community fixed on him, heavy with meaning. Ayoka's hand still rested in his, and though he didn't fully understand her expression, he sensed it was a mixture of gratitude and solemn acceptance. The villagers whispered among themselves, some nodding as if the elder's words confirmed something they had always believed. Others looked at Daniel curiously, as though measuring what kind of man he was. The air felt tense yet strangely ceremonial, as if this moment was part of something much larger than Daniel could grasp. Chief Nantan raised his hand, silencing the murmurs. "The law of our people is clear," he said, his voice steady. "When the life of an Apache woman is saved, the bond between her and the one who saves her cannot be ignored. It is a law older than the stones of these canyons. A bond not of chains, but of spirit." Daniel's heart pounded. He opened his mouth, struggling to find words. I only did what anyone would do," he said, his voice uncertain. "I couldn't just stand by and watch her drown. I wasn't thinking of laws or bonds. I was just trying to help." The villagers listened quietly. Some nodded in agreement, but others seemed unswayed. To them, tradition was not something that could be brushed aside by good intentions. Ayoka looked at Daniel with calm eyes, then spoke softly but clearly. "You must understand, Daniel. For my people, this is not a small thing. What you did was more than an act of courage. You crossed into something sacred." Her words carried a quiet weight that made Daniel's throat tighten. He wanted to argue that it was only instinct, that anyone with a heart would have done the same. But when he saw the way the villagers looked at him, not just with gratitude but with reverence, he realized this was not about what he thought. It was about what they believed. Chief Nantan stepped closer, his gaze firm yet not unkind. "Come," he said. You will join us in the village tonight. You have done something that cannot be ignored. We will speak more when the council gathers." He turned to the others. "Bring them both. The river has spoken. We must honor it." Daniel wanted to protest, but the exhaustion in his body and the seriousness in their faces made him fall silent. He helped Ayoka to her feet, and together they followed the villagers along a winding trail through the cottonwood trees. The desert night was falling quickly, and the stars began to glow above like silver dust. Daniel felt as if he had stepped into another world, one where the rhythm of life was not guided by clocks and calendars, but by traditions as old as the land itself. The village came into view, nestled in a valley with small houses built of wood and adobe. Fires burned in the center, and children ran toward the returning group, their laughter quickly turning into quiet curiosity when they saw Daniel. He was clearly an outsider, and yet he walked beside Ayoka, wrapped in his jacket, her hand still brushing against his arm. Whispers rippled through the crowd as the people realized what had happened. Inside one of the larger houses, Daniel and Ayoka were given blankets and warm food. The stew tasted rich, made from corn and beans with the earthy flavor of herbs. Daniel ate slowly, feeling the warmth return to his tired body. Across from him, Ayoka sipped water, her dark eyes watching him carefully, as though trying to read the thoughts behind his silence. "You are troubled," she finally said, her voice gentle. Daniel gave a short, tired laugh. "That's one way to put it. Where I come from, saving someone from drowning just means you did the right thing. But here, it feels like I've stepped into a story I don't understand." Ayoka nodded slowly, as if she expected this. "You don't have to understand it all at once. Our people believe that when lives are joined through such an act, it is no accident. It means the spirits have chosen a path." Her words were calm, but Daniel felt the weight behind them. "And what if I don't believe in spirits choosing my path?" he asked quietly. Ayoka's eyes softened. "Then you believe in your own choices. But the bond still exists, whether you name it spirit, fate, or chance. It exists because I would not be here if not for you." Her sincerity silenced him. He looked down at his hands, remembering the moment in the river when she clung to him, when he felt her life balanced on the edge of his grip. It was true. Her survival was tied to his actions. The thought humbled him in a way he couldn't explain. Later that evening, the council of elders gathered in the central lodge. The villagers formed a circle around a fire, their faces glowing in the flickering light. Chief Nantan sat among them, with Ayoka on one side and Daniel on the other. The atmosphere was solemn, as though the entire village had paused to witness this moment. Chief Nantan began to speak, his voice steady and deep. "Tonight we acknowledge what has happened. A stranger has saved the life of one of our daughters. This act is not only of courage but of destiny. Our law tells us that such a bond must be honored. The question before us is not whether the bond exists, it does. The question is whether the stranger will respect what it means." Daniel shifted uncomfortably under the weight of so many eyes. He wanted to speak, to say he respected them, but he also feared saying the wrong thing. He finally found his voice. "I respect Ayoka. I respect your people. But I didn't come here looking for this. I don't know if I can carry a bond I don't understand." The words hung heavy in the air. Some villagers frowned, others whispered, but Chief Nantan raised his hand for silence. "Understanding is not demanded all at once," he said. "What is asked is respect. You saved her life. That cannot be undone. What you do now will show whether you honor that gift or throw it away." The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night. Ayoka placed her hand lightly on Daniel's arm. "No one asks you to give up who you are, but you must not dismiss who we are either." Her words were steady, her eyes clear. Daniel met her gaze and felt the quiet strength in her. She was not asking out of weakness or dependence. She was standing as someone proud of her people, proud of their law, and offering him the chance to see it as more than superstition. For the first time, Daniel felt the stirrings of something he could not name, part fear, part curiosity, and part respect. He didn't know where this path would lead, but he knew one thing. His life would never return to the simplicity it had before he stepped into that river. The night ended with the council's decision. Daniel would remain in the village for a time, to learn their ways and see with his own eyes what the bond truly meant. Only then would he be asked to choose whether to honor the sacred law or walk away. As he lay beneath a blanket in the quiet of the guest house, Daniel stared at the wooden ceiling, his mind restless. He thought of the rushing river, of Ahioka's desperate grip, of the eyes of the tribe looking at him as if he carried something larger than himself. He closed his eyes, whispering to the darkness, "What have I stepped into?" Outside, the village slept under the stars. But the bond the elder had spoken of remained, invisible yet unbroken, pulling Daniel deeper into a world where courage, tradition, and destiny would soon collide. The days that followed brought new challenges for Daniel. Chief Nantan's words still echoed in his mind. The bond is not about chains or ownership. It is about honor. Daniel thought about it every morning as he woke to the sounds of the village, and every evening as he sat by the fire. He realized that if he was to truly understand, he could not remain only as an observer. He had to step into their world, not just watch it from the outside. One morning, Ahioka came to him with a simple request. She held out a basket of corn and beans. "Today you work with me," she said. Daniel blinked. "Work with you?" She smiled softly. "Yes, if you are to respect the bond, you must learn the ways of our people. Start with small things." At first, Daniel felt awkward. He had never shelled corn or sorted beans before, and his clumsy fingers made Ahioka laugh gently. But she did not laugh to mock him. She laughed with warmth, encouraging him to try again. Slowly, he learned to move his hands the way she showed him, falling into a rhythm. The task, though simple, carried a strange peace. For the first time, he felt he was not just visiting, but taking part. In the afternoons, the men of the village invited him to help repair fences for the horses. Daniel was not used to heavy tools or long hours of physical work, but the others showed him patiently. His muscles ached, sweat ran down his back, yet he kept going. The villagers noticed his effort, and though few words were spoken, their nods of approval told him he was earning a small measure of respect. The evenings were filled with stories. Around the fire, elders spoke of old battles, sacred lands, and lessons from the past. Daniel listened carefully, often leaning forward, trying to catch every word. The stories were more than history, they were teaching tools, guiding the people in how to live, how to treat one another, and how to respect the land. Ahioka often sat beside him, translating when he struggled with certain Apache words. Her voice was steady, her patience endless. Through her, Daniel began to glimpse a deeper layer of her world, a world where everything was connected, where saving a life was not just about the body, but about spirit and community. Still, not everything was easy. Some in the village remained distant, unsure of him. One man, Tala, often looked at Daniel with suspicion. Tala was strong, confident, and clearly respected among his people. One evening, as Daniel carried water from the stream, Tala approached him. "You are not one of us," Tala said bluntly. "You walk here, eat here, but you do not belong here." Daniel set the water jug down, meeting his gaze calmly. "I don't claim to be one of you. I'm only trying to learn, to respect what your people believe." Tala's eyes narrowed. "Respect is not enough. Our ways are not games for outsiders. If you wish to be tied to Ahioka, you must prove your heart, not only your hands." Daniel felt a flash of unease, but he nodded. "Then I will prove it. Tell me what I must do." Tala said nothing more, only turned and walked away. Daniel watched him go, realizing that acceptance would not come easily. Respect had to be shown not in words, but in action, again and again. The chance came sooner than he expected. A few days later, the villagers prepared for a ceremony that honored the river, the very force that had nearly taken Ahioka's life. Chief Nantan invited Daniel to take part, though it was not a decision made lightly. "You were chosen by the river when you saved her," the chief said. "If you are to stand among us, you must stand with us in this." Daniel agreed, though he had no idea what awaited him. On the evening of the ceremony, the entire village gathered by the riverbank. Torches lined the path, their flames flickering in the cool night air. The water rushed quietly, reflecting the light of the moon. The people sang softly in Apache, their voices blending into a haunting and beautiful harmony. Daniel was guided to the edge of the river. Chief Nantan placed a hand on his shoulder. "You entered these waters once to save a life. Tonight you enter again, not to fight, but to give respect. Walk into the river, and when you return, you will speak what this bond means to you." Daniel swallowed hard. The river, dark and deep, seemed to whisper with its own voice. He stepped into the water, the cold biting at his skin. The current tugged at his legs, but he pressed forward until the water reached his waist. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply. Memories of the rescue rushed back. The fear in Ahioka's eyes, the struggle, the desperate grip of her hand. But alongside the fear came something else. Strength, connection, purpose. When he emerged from the river, dripping and shivering, the villagers watched in silence. Daniel raised his head and spoke, his voice unsteady at first but growing firm. I don't fully understand your ways yet, but I know this: when I saved Ayoka, I felt something greater than myself. I felt her life in my hands, and I knew I could not let go. That moment changed me. I may not be one of you by birth, but I want to honor what it means to be bound to her by your law. I want to respect it, not as a chain, but as a promise. The villagers murmured, their expressions softening. Chief Nantan nodded slowly. Ahyoka's eyes glistened with quiet pride, and Daniel felt her gaze steady him. Tala, too, watched from the crowd, his expression unreadable. In the days that followed, Daniel noticed a shift. People greeted him more warmly, including him in tasks and meals. Children no longer looked at him with hesitation but with curiosity, asking him to show them his camera, laughing at the strange pictures it captured. The women offered him food without waiting for Ayoka to ask, and the men spoke to him with more ease. But the greatest change was within Daniel himself. He no longer felt like an intruder watching from the outside. He felt slowly like a bridge between two worlds, carrying his own history but learning to walk in theirs. He found joy in small things, the rhythm of working with his hands, the laughter shared by the fire, the quiet moments when Ahyoka explained the meaning of traditions. And as he lay under the stars at night, he began to wonder if perhaps fate had truly led him here, not just to save a life, but to find a new one. The bond that once felt like a burden was now beginning to feel like a choice that was changing him in ways he never imagined. The night air was cool, and the stars stretched wide above the Apache village, shining brighter than Daniel had ever seen in the city. He sat near the fire, staring at the flames as they rose and fell, listening to the crackle of wood and the distant sound of the river. His heart was restless. Chief Nantan had told him earlier that the council would meet the next evening to decide what came next. Daniel knew the choice would not only be theirs, it would also be his. Ayoka sat across from him, her face calm but her eyes searching his. She had seen his struggle over the past days, his doubts, his questions, and his moments of discovery. Quietly she asked, "Are you afraid of tomorrow?" Daniel thought about the question, then nodded. "Yes, afraid, but not in the way I was before. When I first heard about your sacred law, I felt trapped, like I was being tied to something I didn't understand. Now I'm afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of dishonoring your people, and you." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Fear can be good. It means you care about the weight of the choice." She leaned closer, her voice soft but steady. "But remember, Daniel, no one can force your heart. If you choose to walk away, the bond will not vanish, but it will not hold you here. What matters is whether you honor it willingly." Daniel looked at her in the glow of the firelight. She wasn't demanding or pleading. She was simply telling him the truth. And in that honesty, he felt something deeper: respect, trust, and a quiet bond that had grown between them since the day he pulled her from the river. The following day was filled with an unusual stillness. Villagers prepared for the council gathering, moving with a kind of quiet purpose. Children were asked to stay close to their families, and the elders walked slowly toward the central lodge. Daniel felt the weight of every step as he followed Ahyoka and Chief Nantan into the large wooden structure. Inside, the fire burned in the center, casting shadows on the walls. The circle of elders sat waiting, their faces calm but serious. The people of the village gathered outside, waiting to hear what would happen. Inside, the lodge was silent except for the sound of the fire. Chief Nantan spoke first, his voice deep and steady. "We are gathered because of a bond that was made not by words but by action. Daniel, a stranger, pulled Ahyoka from the river and saved her life. By our law, their lives are tied. But the law is not only about tradition, it is about choice. Tonight we ask him to speak. Will he honor the bond or will he leave it behind?" All eyes turned to Daniel. His throat tightened, but he rose to his feet. The firelight flickered across his face as he looked around at the elders, then at Ahyoka, who sat quietly by his side. "I came here a stranger," Daniel began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I saved Ahyoka, I wasn't thinking of laws or destiny. I was just trying to do what was right. At first, when I heard your sacred law, I felt trapped, like something was being placed on me without my choice. I thought about leaving many times." He paused, glancing at the faces watching him. "But then I began to see I saw the way you honor each other, the way you honor the land, the way you honor life itself. I saw that your law is not about chains. It's about responsibility. It's about respect. He turned toward Ahyoka, his voice softening. And through this bond, I began to know her, not only as the woman I saved, but as someone strong, wise, and deeply connected to her people. This bond is not a burden. It is a gift. And if you will allow me, I choose to honor it, not because I must, but because I want to. A hush fell over the room. The elders exchanged glances, then nodded slowly, their expressions approving. Chief Nantan rose to his feet, his presence commanding but warm. Then it is decided. The bond is honored, not as a weight forced upon you, but as a path chosen by your heart. The villagers outside cheered softly as word spread. Inside, Ahyoka's eyes shone with quiet pride. She reached out and placed her hand in Daniel's. In that moment, there were no words needed. The bond was sealed not by law alone, but by choice. The following days were filled with celebration. The villagers prepared a feast, cooking corn, beans, and roasted meat over open fires. Children danced around the flames while the elders sang songs of gratitude to the river and the spirits. Daniel, though still an outsider by birth, no longer felt like one. He joined in the work, carrying wood for the fires, serving food, and even laughing with the children who had once watched him with wary eyes. One evening, as the celebration continued, Tala approached Daniel. The man who had once doubted him now stood silently for a moment before speaking. "You proved yourself," Tala said. "Not by words, but by standing with us. I respect that." Daniel extended his hand and Tala shook it firmly. The gesture, simple as it was, carried the weight of acceptance. Later, as the night grew quiet, Daniel and Ahyoka walked together to the edge of the river. The water shimmered under the moonlight. The same river that had nearly taken her life. The same river that had brought him into hers. "It feels different now," Daniel said softly, watching the current flow. Ahyoka nodded, "Because now you see it not as danger, but as connection. The river took you into our world, and it gave me my life back." She turned to him, her eyes steady. "Do you regret staying?" Daniel shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "No, I thought I was only saving you that day. But maybe you were also saving me from a life where I didn't truly belong. Here I feel like I'm part of something real." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of drums from the village. For the first time, Daniel felt peace. Peace not because he had all the answers, but because he had made a choice that was true to his heart. In the weeks that followed, he continued to learn the ways of the tribe. He worked with the men, helped care for the land, and listened to the elders' wisdom. Slowly, he became more than just a guest. He became part of their story, and as he walked beside Ahyoka each day, he knew the bond was not just sacred law, it was destiny, written not only in tradition but in the choices they had made together. The river flowed endlessly, carrying with it the memory of the moment their lives had changed, and though Daniel had entered it as a stranger, he now stood on its banks as a man who had found something greater than he ever expected: family, belonging, and a bond stronger than the current itself. The morning sun rose over the Apache village, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. Daniel woke to the sound of voices outside, the smell of wood smoke drifting through the open window. For a moment he almost forgot where he was. The previous day had felt like a dream. Rushing water, Ahyoka's desperate cry, the struggle in the river, and then the council declaring he was bound by sacred law. Now as he rubbed the sleep from his eyes, reality pressed in. He was still in the village, and his life was no longer his alone. Stepping outside, Daniel saw children chasing each other near the fire pit, their laughter filling the morning air. Women carried baskets of corn and beans, preparing food, while men worked with tools, repairing fences and tending horses. The village moved with quiet rhythm, everyone knowing their place and purpose. Daniel, however, felt like an intruder. People looked at him as he passed, some with curiosity, others with respect, and a few with guarded expressions. He wasn't sure if he was welcome or simply being tolerated. Ahyoka approached him with a calm smile. She carried a small basket filled with herbs. "You slept well?" she asked gently. Daniel nodded, though his mind was heavy. "As well as I could. Everything feels different." "It is different," she replied softly. "You are part of something now, even if you don't yet understand it." She handed him a small piece of bread from her basket. "Eat. You will need your strength. They walked together through the village, and Ayoka explained some of the traditions. She showed him the sacred tree where offerings were left, the community lodge where decisions were made, and the small stream where children played safely under watchful eyes. Her voice was calm, almost musical, and Daniel found himself listening more to the way she spoke than the words themselves. Still, his heart carried a heavy question. Could he accept what they asked of him? Later that day, Daniel's friends arrived in the area. They had been worried when he hadn't returned from his hike and had contacted local authorities, only to hear he was safe in the Apache village. When they finally reached him, their reaction was not what Daniel hoped for. "Man, what are you doing here?" his friend Mark asked, shaking his head. "We thought you got lost, but instead you're living here?" Daniel explained quickly about the river, about saving Ayoka, and about the tribe's law. But as he spoke, he could see the disbelief on their faces growing stronger. "So let me get this straight," Mark said with a laugh. "You saved someone's life and now they say you belong to her? That's insane. You can't be serious about this." Another friend, Jason, added, "You should just thank them for the food and get out. You don't owe them anything. It's the 21st century, not some old legend." Daniel felt torn. Part of him wanted to defend the tribe's ways, but another part was shaken by his friend's words. He looked at Ayoka, who stood quietly beside him, her eyes calm but watchful. She didn't argue or explain. She only waited to see what Daniel would say. "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "It's not that simple. To them, this is real. It's not just a story." His friends rolled their eyes. "It's superstition," Mark muttered. "You're not one of them. Don't get trapped in this nonsense." Their dismissive words cut deep, not because Daniel fully agreed with the tribe, but because he had seen their sincerity. The night before, around the fire, when Chief Nantan had spoken, there was no mockery, no trick. It had felt serious, rooted in something Daniel couldn't easily explain. After his friends left, shaking their heads, Daniel sat alone near the edge of the village. His thoughts churned like storm clouds. He didn't want to offend the people who had welcomed him, but he also feared losing his independence. He had always lived by his own choices, not by laws he didn't understand. Ayoka approached quietly and sat beside him. For a long time she said nothing, simply letting the silence stretch between them. Finally she spoke. "Your friends do not see as we see. That is not their fault, but you must decide for yourself, not for them." Daniel looked at her, troubled. "What if I can't accept this bond? What if I can't live by laws I don't understand?" Her gaze was steady. "Then you walk away. But understand, Daniel, when you saved me, you touched more than my hand. You touched my life, and my life is tied to my people. You cannot separate the two." Her words struck him harder than his friend's mockery. She was right. Saving her hadn't been a small act. It had created a connection he couldn't undo, no matter how much he tried to rationalize it. In the following days, the tension grew. Some villagers embraced Daniel, offering him food, teaching him small tasks, and showing respect. Others kept their distance, unsure if an outsider could truly honor their law. Daniel felt caught between two worlds, one pulling him back to the freedom of his old life, the other drawing him into a tradition that demanded respect. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Daniel witnessed something that shook him deeply. A group of tourists had wandered near the village, laughing loudly and pointing at the homes. One of them mocked the sacred tree, pretending to bow and laugh at the offerings placed there. The villagers grew tense, their faces hardening, but they did not react with anger. Instead, they stood silently, their dignity shining stronger than the insults. Daniel's friends, who had returned with the tourists, chuckled at the scene. "See," Mark whispered to him. "It's just silly. Why are you letting this trap you?" But Daniel felt a surge of anger. For the first time, he stood not as a confused outsider, but as someone who understood the insult. He stepped forward, his voice firm. "That's enough. Show some respect." The tourists laughed, but Daniel's eyes blazed. "You don't have to believe what they believe," he said sharply, but mocking them. "That's not strength. That's weakness." His words silenced the group. The villagers who had remained calm now looked at Daniel with new eyes. Chief Nantan, who stood among them, gave a small nod of approval. Ahyoka's gaze softened, pride shining quietly in her expression. That night, as Daniel sat by the fire, he realized something had shifted inside him. He still wasn't sure if he could accept the sacred law fully, but he knew one thing. He respected it. And respect was the beginning of understanding. Chief Nantan approached him, his voice low but steady. You stood for us today, though you did not have to. That shows more than courage. It shows heart. Remember this, Daniel. The bond is not about chains or ownership. It is about honor. To honor the life you saved. To honor the people who are part of that life. Daniel nodded slowly. He finally began to see what the chief meant. It wasn't about losing himself. It was about gaining a deeper connection. The clash between worlds was still inside him, but he was starting to realize he didn't have to reject one to accept the other. Perhaps he could stand with one foot in each, bridging the gap instead of choosing sides. As the fire crackled and the stars spread across the dark sky, Daniel glanced at Ayoka. She sat with her family, her laughter gentle, her presence strong. He realized then that the bond wasn't a burden forced upon him. It was a gift, waiting for him to decide whether to embrace it. And though he didn't yet speak the words aloud, deep in his heart he knew. His life had been forever changed by the river, and by the woman he had pulled from its grasp.